I'm Ashley Palmer,
And I'm Samuel Simonson.
and this is the Dr. Dumbass and Wounded Healer podcast.
What do we do here, Ashley?
Well, we talk to forward thinkers. Why would we do that?
Because there's lots of interesting people out there with ideas for how to make the world a better place.
Yeah, and get out of this garbage fire.
The collective burning mess that we're all in. Yeah.
Thanks
Something
for being
like
here.
that. Yeah, we're just talking to people. Yeah, well, we might as well just jump right into it then. So I guess first, tell us a bit about who you are and how you got to this place in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm Catherine Clinton. I'm a licensed naturopathic physician, and I love to talk about quantum biology. I love to teach about it because I think it really helps provide an expanded toolkit. And right now we're in a chronic disease epidemic really across the globe. We're seeing that in so many different countries, so many different ages. It isn't just affecting our older populations. And I think that quantum biology, when it's applied to our health, it offers a whole new expanded toolkit. And I got interested in quantum biology when I was in naturopathic medical school. It was my second year of school. It was sort of that initiation year, really long hours, long clinic hours. And it was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. The stress just kind of took me out, and I was diagnosed with Lyme disease. I was diagnosed with Hashimoto thyroiditis, ulcerative colitis. My health really took a nosedive. And I was in the perfect place, right? I was in naturopathic medical school, which was also a dual school with acupuncture. So I had all these modalities. I was right down the hill from a very progressive allopathic medical school, an MD school. But even though I was able to kind of regain my health and become productive again, I was able to attend classes, I was able to do my clinic shifts, I still was really, really sick and suffering. And that's when a physician that I was doing clinical rotations with, and she was actually my physician, she suggested that I look at psychoneuroimmunology. And that's just a big word for how our thoughts and emotions impact our biology. And as you know, they have an enormous impact. And at the same time, this was like 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, I was looking at mitochondrial research. It was like the latest thing, right? Oh, now we understand how our mitochondria influence our health. They're foundational. Mitochondria are those little organelles in all of our cells that produce ATP. And when we see a dip in function in our mitochondria or ATP, then we see symptoms. We see disease onset. And I was looking at the research, and an article from Martin Picard came up showing how our thoughts and emotions impact our mitochondrial function. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. This is so much more than the chemical mechanical model we learned in school. When I was in naturopathic school, it was all chemical based. So if you are ill, it's from a chemical imbalance. And if you're healthy, it's from a chemical balance, right? This idea of like keys and receptors floating around until the key finds their receptor, unlocking the receptor and creating biological action. We know that happens, but we also know that we're made up of trillions of cells, and each one is completing hundreds and thousands of tasks each second. And mathematically, that's impossible with that chemical mechanical model. And that's where quantum biology comes in. It is able to explain that speed and efficiency and quantity, that huge amount of reaction that a cell has in each second, so much more efficiently than the current chemical mechanical model. It doesn't negate that model. It just
Mhm.
puts forth an expanded view. And that's really where I got my start, was looking at how our thoughts and emotions, how coherence, and then I was looking at research out of UC Berkeley and how quantum coherence really helps with photosynthesis and getting into the research about how we photosynthesize. I mean, it was just like a rabbit hole, and I don't think I've climbed out of that rabbit hole. It's just so fascinating.
Yeah, just still tumbling through it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I guess so. What do you mean by quantum biology? Like what is that?
That's a great question, right? We've heard about quantum physics, we've heard about biology, but this new emerging field of quantum biology is looking at how living systems incorporate quantum phenomenon like tunneling or entanglement or superposition and coherence. And it's an incredible investigation into sort of the smallest pieces of life and how they impact our biological function. And what we're looking at is, our smallest pieces, our proteins, our enzymes, our mitochondria, our DNA, how these things are affected by the flow of electrons, the flow of protons, of photons of light, or phonons of sound. And really, what it is this magnificent, invisible blueprint that seems to be guiding life as we know it, that we didn't have the sophistication of equipment and technology to test and understand. And we finally do. We're finally understanding that our understanding of life for the last 100 years now can go much deeper and explain things in a much more efficient way and provide tools for our health that weren't there a few decades ago, even.
Hmm.
Awesome. So something that I'm kind of wondering about, maybe I'm kind of off here, but when I think about the chemical mechanical model versus quantum model, and I wonder how like the perception of what time is relates to that. Like the chemical mechanical model might seem to be more related to the idea that time is linear, and quantum biology and might seem to be more related to the idea that time is cyclical, which people have thought for thousands of years. And I was just kind of wondering what you thought about that.
Oh my goodness, that's brilliant. I love that question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. And I think that's very astute of you, because we do think in these broad linear strokes, right, of how time flows. But when we look at it from a cyclical nature, we understand that we really function on a circadian rhythm, on a lunar circadian rhythm, on a seasonal rhythm. And we've really been divorced from that cyclical nature of time. And I mean, it's really new and emerging stuff, right? It was 2017 that three researchers were awarded the Nobel Prize for their work with chronobiology, or how we have circadian genes and how our biology is really driven by this circadian rhythm of the sun. And so that's a great question. And I think that it comes back to really how we have evolved on this earth
Mhm.
in these cyclical patterns. And the more that we can get in sync with them, the more options for health, the more supportive of our health that synchronization will bring about. It's really incredible. I mean, even just thinking about the seasons, right? Like we think about summertime and getting sunshine. We often don't think about going outside in the winter and getting that cold exposure and what that does for our body, and how that is really supportive with our mitochondrial function and protecting our mitochondria and inducing more mitochondria. It's just, a really interesting way to look at our health and how there is this beautiful cyclical nature that if we can sync with it, there's much more opportunity for health.
Mhm. So that sounds really good. Like, would you say the mitochondrial dysfunction then is like kind of the basis of almost all the chronic disease or a lot of the chronic disease we're seeing?
I think we could look at it from that angle. Absolutely. We could tie it down to mitochondria. There's another system at work in the body through melanin, right? Through melanin, not only when we say melanin, we think of melanin on our skin, in our eyes and hair, but it's throughout our internal body. And I think, from a quantum biological perspective, I think we could go even smaller than those things and look at the flow of electrons and protons and photons. And when that is diminished, when that is blocked in our system, that leads to dysfunction. But there's lots of research out there pointing to mitochondrial health, right? Douglas Wallace has done an incredible job really highlighting the idea that most of our modern disease is a dysfunction in mitochondria. But I think it's exciting to go even deeper and say, that's an issue with the flow of electrons and the flow of protons and the capacity for photons of light and phonons of sound to affect change in the mitochondria. So I get kind of nerdy with that answer, but yes, we could pinpoint it down to mitochondrial function for sure.
Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and light and sound is something that I've been thinking about a lot, and like how sound is primary to light, and how people have been using sound healing for a long time, and that also got me kind of thinking about music festivals and how if you're at a music festival, like the sound and the vibe and everything that's going on can be like a really transformational experience for people. And I saw on your Instagram, like your last post, you were talking about light and sound, and you wrote something. You wrote, sound creates light, which guides our biology and structures our internal water. Life is powered by frequency, information, and it's time we acknowledge and tend to it. And I was wondering if you could kind of talk about that concept and how we can acknowledge and tend to it.
Okay. So sound, right. It's working through a medium and it's jostling the molecules in the air, right? And it's causing these inelastic collisions of molecules, and that creates infrared energy. And I think it's becoming more and more popular and well known and understood, even in the general public, how light therapies can be so beneficial for our health, right? Red light therapy, infrared light therapy. But the idea that sound creates infrared energy is something we haven't quite gotten to as a populace. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about this mechanical pressure wave causing inelastic collisions in the molecules that cause light. And it's really interesting when we look at what light and sound can do within the human body. They can affect so many different changes. And when I say that light is guiding our biology, a lot of us also don't realize that our cells are communicating in the infrared light range. And, that's certainly not something that I learned in medical school, but it's well accepted in the science, just like this communication network based on electromagnetic fields. Our cells are communicating with EMF. It guides their behavior and movement and differentiation, like how a cell becomes an elbow or an ear. And so, this idea that there's this frequency language in the body, and if we can acknowledge that, if we can acknowledge the effects that light has, that sound has, that fields of electricity or magnetism, or even our thoughts, right? Going back to psychoneuroimmunology and how our thoughts impact our body, if we can acknowledge the power that these things that we can't see the power that they have to increase our health or diminish our health is really important, because then we have a whole new perspective from which to approach health that isn't a chemical mechanical approach. It doesn't negate that. Again, like, yes, we want to use that, but when we have more tools that we know about, what we're interested in doing is creating a healthier person, having better health for ourselves and our families and our community and our globe. So we should be utilizing all of these tools, especially when we talk about quantum biology. A lot of them are free, right? That sun is rising and setting every day wherever you are. We are making sound with our voices. There are so many different free, accessible tools that I really think people should know about, and the doctors should know about as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
What are some of those? Like, there's the sunlight you mentioned. I guess there's probably things like toning and, um, other ways to use sound baths, things like that. But do you have other
Yeah.
ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we look at light, of course, there's red light therapy that's very popular right now in like that biohacking world, right? And it increases that efficiency of the mitochondria to make ATP. But the natural light, the sunlight, if we get that natural light in our eyes, and it does not need to be looking straight at the sun, right? We don't want to do that. Just going outside in those first few hours after sunrise, that spectrum of light tells our body to create pregnenolone, that backbone of all of our sex hormones.
Mm.
It tells our body to create cortisol, that hormone that allows us to feel energized and get out of bed in the morning and focus, right? Those things are really, really important, and they're stimulated by that specific spectrum of light in morning sunlight. We see that it increases our neurotransmitters, dopamine and serotonin, which later will be converted into melatonin as the sun sets, and if we lower those artificial lights inside. And so that's a powerful impact when we're looking at pharmaceutical interventions of how we can increase our neurotransmitters and serotonin, or our anti-inflammatory cortisol slash cortisone and different anti-inflammatory drugs, um, hormone replacement. To think that something as accessible as going outside for 10 minutes in the morning has the capacity to do a lot of those things is really a phenomenal tool to have in our possession for affecting health. And sound is the same thing, right? Like you mentioned, toning or chanting, humming. These things create melatonin. So melatonin, obviously, a lot of us have heard that melatonin is released from our pineal gland when the lights lower at night. And I live in the Pacific Northwest, so it gets dark here in the winter like 4:30 or 5. And we're
Mhm.
not like bumping into each other in the dark. We just turn the lights down lower to something like the salt lamp, more orange tone lights. We move from lights that are over our head, like the sun would be, to actually lower lights, like not even the level of lights, but like the direction of the light
Mhm.
coming into our eyes is lower. It's not overhead. And doing these things allows for that release of melatonin from the pineal gland. But we also have cellular melatonin from our mitochondria. And when we hum, when we tone and chant, it increases our cellular melatonin that again can help with sleep, but it's also a master antioxidant. It's
Mhm.
affecting hundreds of cellular cascades and enzymes in the body, and it's really gotten its name and fame for its capacity to help us sleep and repair and recycle some of those cells that are dysfunctional, which is incredible. but it
Mhm.
has so many different uses. So something like toning or self-generated sound has so many different effects. And something like a sound bath or a gong or even a drum beat
Mhm.
that might be present at a festival, right?
Mhm.
Those low frequency sounds from the work of John Stewart Reed and Professor Sunjul Ji, they have collaborated on some incredible research. And John Stewart Reed is an acoustic physicist, and he's the creator of the cymoscope. And it's this neat machine that has a little glass cuvette. You put liquid into it, you expose it to different sound frequencies to look at the cymatic patterns.
Mhm.
And what they did was they looked at blood. They took blood from a blood bank and they exposed it to different frequencies of sound, and they found something incredible. They found that these low frequencies of sound actually help repair our red blood cells and our white blood cells, and they increase their lifespan. They make them stay around longer. And not only that, not only are they repairing and increasing their lifespan, they actually increase their oxygen binding capacity. Of course, we're talking about the red blood cells now,
Mhm.
but they repair them, they make them live longer, and they make them hold more oxygen. And that's incredible when we look at how oxygenation status affects our health. And something as easy as listening to some of our favorite music can induce this higher oxygenation status of the body. It can help tone our vagus nerve and
Mhm.
decrease inflammation. I mean, it's absolutely incredible to think that something so simple as sound can be doing um, such incredible work in the body. And then, you can go all the way over to some of the ultrasound and how that is being used to treat really devastating cancers, right? Liver cancer and bladder cancer and pancreatic cancer, these cancers that are really difficult to treat in traditional medicine, they're being treated very effectively with focused ultrasound waves. And that is non invasive. It doesn't have a lot of side effects. I mean, it's a completely new and exciting paradigm. And so you have like a whole spectrum of things that can be used to increase our health and longevity.
Hmm. That's so interesting. And that I also made me think like, say you were in a hospital and in like a trauma situation where someone's lost a lot of blood and you're giving them blood, like the sound that's around might be impacting how well the body's absorbing the blood. Like having,
Yes.
yeah, that's
Isn't that
interesting.
incredible? Or
Yeah.
even at a, like, blood bank, if they just had,
Yeah.
like, low frequency, music, kind of keeping those cells more vital and, binding more oxygen. I mean, what a really simple intervention that could be really impactful for someone's health.
Yeah.
I guess it makes me wonder, like, these things are so simple. Why do we not see more of it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think, it sort of has maybe two answers. And one of them is that this information doesn't get a lot of airtime. I think that's why I get so passionate about sharing this information. It doesn't get a lot of attention. It certainly doesn't get a lot of funding. And so that's a big obstacle into people
Mhm.
even knowing about this, right? I had somebody reach out and say, because of something I shared, they were able to utilize this ultrasound for treatment with cancer, which is just so exciting. And I think the other side of it is really looking at our current paradigm in medicine. and where the money goes and what is funded in research. And most of the money that is handed out in grants and funding on a national perspective is given to research that is going to produce a new drug or a new device.
Mhm.
And that can be problematic when you're talking about things like sunshine and sound and the power of our thoughts and emotions, right? That is not the newest, latest um, technology. It is not exciting, and it really doesn't further that funding mission that is backed by some of these pharmaceutical industries. So I think we've got several different things, but I also think that change really comes from the bottom up. So the more we understand this information, the more people understand it and then ask their doctors, why aren't you talking about sunlight? What should I do with sunlight? It really starts to push a change in that way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Do you see there being a limit to the potency of this type of work? Or-
That's a great question. And yeah, I do. I think, I was just on a call with someone who was going through menopause and wanting circadian medicine to sort of reverse that. And it's like, I mean, circadian medicine is incredible, but there's a life cycle. And as women, we're going to go through menopause. As humans, we're going to die, right? There are
Mhm.
limits to these things. And I think that there absolutely are limits on this type of medicine, as there are limits on all kinds of medicine, because we are human, and that secular time is secular on a very large level for us, on a macro scale, right? We're brought
Mhm.
into the world and then we leave. um, but some of the maybe miracles that people talk about with the power of the mind really gets you to ask that question, right? Like, where is the limit with this? So I think that's a really interesting question, but I also think it brings us back to our discomfort as a society, talking
Mhm.
about death and illness and the inevitability of us moving on. So
Mhm.
that might not be the answer that you were expecting, so you can ask
No,
me more.
that's perfect. I think, we talk about that a lot, how, people or society isn't, we're not connected to death, like you said. So I think that's accurate.
Yeah, I think it would be really healthy for us as a society to become more acquainted with that, to become more comfortable with grief. I mean, I think it's just um, so unfortunate that there isn't more acceptance, there isn't more space made for that grieving process as a community around
Mhm.
death. Um, and just a conversation, right? To really have it not be this sudden thing that we try to really move on from and not think about, but really open up that vulnerability and open up that emotional window of tolerance where we can talk about death and we can talk about our lives and what we want from them and what is most important, right? Because when we continually push that aside, it's so easy to have that common story of like, oh, this person on their deathbed had so many different regrets. And it's
Mhm.
like, well, if we can keep that idea that our time here is finite, then maybe we wouldn't have so many regrets. Maybe we would put our relationships and our health at the forefront.
Yeah, it makes me think about like the frequency of fear, or like, that really holds people back from, living a life.
And denial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I was excited is a weird word, but I was, I can't think of the word. I was grateful to see that one of the studies that came out around COVID, they were looking at risk factors. And one of the second biggest risk factor was that emotion of fear for becoming hospitalized.
Mm.
And it was like, wow, there's finally some acknowledgement of how powerful our emotions can be. And if we could just have a little bit more open discussion and a little bit more space in our lives, and professionally too. I remember when my dad had a heart attack, I was trying to get the cardiologist to say that stress can impact our heart health. And he just would not go there. Like he was just,
Wow.
right? You would just absolutely not go there. And it's like, can we just acknowledge the full range of emotions that we have? Because I think, I talk a lot about heart coherence and the power of love and gratitude and awe. But whenever I do, I try to make sure that I talk about how we're human and we're not meant to think only positive thoughts and only be in a space of love. We're meant to be angry. I
Mhm.
mean, sometimes anger is righteous, right? We feel it with every fiber and we should. Same with sorrow, right? These like traditions where we wail and we drop to our knees and we feel the sorrow everywhere. Our modern society, especially in North America and Europe, some of the Western countries
Mhm.
really don't provide space for us to be angry or sad or grieving or fearful. But when we can be in coherence with our true emotions, when we can actually feel them and not feel guilty or push them into blame or try to repress them, then what we often find is that once we fully feel them and express them, then what's on the other side of those emotions are all those emotions that we talk about having a good effects, right? Like love, like the other side of grief is often love, right? Because that's what's making us grieve, is that loss of a love, right? And so I think that remembering to be coherent and really be authentic in our emotions and allow space to express them is a powerful medicine just in and of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know Gabor Mate talks a lot about like authenticity is so important for health. But yeah, it's kind of reminding me of the saying like conflict avoided is conflict multiplied. Like when you're avoiding things that exist, it doesn't make it go away, it just makes it louder. But
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And in the body, especially, right? Because every cell is listening.
Mhm.
And it just takes that uncomfortable feeling and it multiplies it into danger signals, right? And we know the importance of having safety in our system, right? Our cells can't repair. We literally can't heal if our cells are constantly given these signals of danger. And repressed emotions are an enormous source of danger signals in the body. Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, because then that's just echoing all the time in the body, but the mind is telling a different story, and then people are just living up here. It's
Yeah.
yeah, it's really interesting. So the body over time is just in perpetual danger, I guess. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's doing what it should do if we're in
Yeah.
danger, right? It's increasing inflammation. It's kind of deranging the immune system. It's doing all the things you would want if a bear jumps out of the closet, right? We
Yeah.
want all those things to happen. But it's not a bear that jumped out of the closet. It's a feeling that we haven't allowed ourselves to feel or talk about. And so it's really unfortunate that we aren't making space for some of those conversations and some of those just practices as a society, like have
Yeah.
it be okay to fall to our knees and sob and wail when we lose somebody, right? Things like that, becoming more comfortable with these uncomfortable conversations and emotions can be so healing.
Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah. So I guess with the repressed emotions, we people don't even know they're there. Um, how do you, or do you have ideas for how to bring those into the conscious?
That's a really great question. And I think that some of the research and work around psychoneuroimmunology sort of brings this to the forefront. And geez, there's just so many researchers. We could talk about polyvagal theory, we could talk about
Mm.
biofield therapy, but this idea that we're sort of constantly running a subconscious train of thought is really powerful, because I think becoming aware of that is really the work of just that awareness, right? Why did I react that way? Why did
Mhm.
I have that knee jerk defensiveness? Or why did I feel so jealous? We start to look underneath those immediate knee jerk reactions and we see, oh, it's because I feel like I'm not worthy of that. Or it's because I think that I'm the source of that trouble. And it comes back to these unwritten, unsaid, subconscious trains of thought. And I think that awareness is kind of the first step. And we're talking about uncomfortable feelings. That's uncomfortable work, right?
Mhm.
Is recognizing like, oh geez, it's not the other person. It is this thing that in most cases we're handed at a very young age, right? That perpetuate over time. But the beautiful thing is, once we're aware of it, we can't go back. We
Mhm.
know what's happening when we're having those reactions. And it can be as simple, I have a lot of patients record themselves um, sort of saying the opposite, right? Like, you are worthy, you are safe, I love you, I'm wrapping you in a blanket of love, you belong here, whatever it might be that sort of counteracts that subconscious train of thought can be, I mean, it sounds very simple and sort of strange, but it can be so powerful to play that daily over the course of days to really kind of rework that. Repressed emotions, those trains of thought. But I think really the first step is evaluating those triggers, because those knee-jerk reactions that we can't explain, like if somebody does something wrong to you and you feel angry, that's pretty clear, right?
Mhm.
Somebody comes up and slaps you in the face, well, yeah, feeling an immediate reaction of anger or shock, or hurt, that makes sense. But when somebody does something that triggers you in a way that's more than it should be, right? Those are the cases that we look at and we say, why did I get so upset about that? What's underneath that reaction? And once we can start doing that, we start to see a landscape that we never noticed before. And I think just that in and of itself can be immensely healing.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it sounds like curiosity can kind of open up, be an invitation for these things to come up. And I was wondering because you talked a little bit about because this is really common in like professional colleges, like you get overworked and you have to neglect your body's needs, and then people get sick and burnt out and whatnot. And yeah, you talked about how you developed like Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, and some other things. Um, did you, like, recover from these? Like, what was kind of that process of recovery, if you'd like to talk about that?
Yeah, I think this is a perfect point to kind of weave the two together. Yeah, I was diagnosed with Lyme disease and ulcerative colitis. I really kind of racked it up. It was this domino effect. And I was in the great place to affect my physical health, right? I cleaned up my diet. I was taking a lot of nutritional supplements. I did a round for a couple months of prednisone, of steroids to help get the inflammation down, right? So I was using all the tools that I had available, but it kind of, when you're drowning, it pushed my head above water, but it didn't get me out of the water, right? I was still fluctuating. If I had a bad day, if I didn't eat right, if I didn't take my supplements, I'd be right back in that state of suffering, of illness. And what was the big needle pusher was looking at my own emotional state and my own state of psychoneuroimmunology. And I know that that is not a comfortable thing. When the physician that I was working with was kind of pushing me to look at that, I was like, no, let's look at that patient's psychoneuroimmunology. Let's look at that patient. Like, I don't want to look at mine, right? Because it's hard work, and it's much easier to focus on your fruits and vegetables, right?
Mhm.
But it was the dramatic needle mover in my recovery, was looking at that emotional landscape and how my inflammation can instantly go through the roof depending on my emotional reactions and my state, or the vice versa, right? If I feel safe and like I belong and everything's okay, then that inflammation just eases. And coming to terms with that, and coming to terms with tools that allow me to access that state of safety, was really what was foundational to my healing. Although, of course, there was that lifestyle and supplements and even pharmaceutical drugs and acupuncture and all these different modalities, but nothing compared to the power of my own thoughts.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And so, how did you go about changing those thoughts? You mentioned mantras before. Was it like with a therapist, or was it by yourself, or how did you do it?
Yeah, I was actually, the school that I was in, I went to the National University of Natural Medicine. It was a campus that had naturopathic medicine, so you could get your doctorate in natural medicine, or you could get a degree in acupuncture and Chinese medicine. And at the time, sort of have an overachiever complex, I was doing both. And I had
Mhm.
to bow out of the Chinese medicine program. But in that program, they offered Qigong classes and chanting. And it was something that, when you're really not feeling good in your physical body, when you have pain, and discomfort, sitting down, like in the lotus position and meditating, is so hard. You just don't feel good. It's hard to be quiet. So those qigong classes where we were shaking, where we were chanting, they offered a whole different avenue for me to access health. And I think what was really powerful too was I was going through training at the Heart Math Institute and learning about heart coherence exercises. And that daily practice of having gratitude for something. And, it doesn't really matter what it is. It can be that you woke up and you're breathing, it can be material, your fancy car, it really doesn't matter. There's no judgment about what you're feeling gratitude for. It's just that feeling of gratitude and that feeling of awe. And after practicing that for years, it becomes like a feeling you can sink into, like a posture almost, right? So when I am in conversations, and I don't do this all the time, but I try, when I'm in conversations that are adversarial and somebody's, upset and there's friction there, I try to sink into that state of coherence, because we know that that state of coherence between the heart and the brain definitely rewires our own biological system in a state of coherence. We're wired to our frontal lobe that's rational, calm decisions. It affects our neurological function, our cardiovascular function, inflammatory state. But that state of coherence, we can entrain other people's energy into that state of coherence. And when I say energy, that's so vague. I literally mean their electromagnetic field, right? That field emanating from their heart. And this is something that Heart Math Institute has done incredible research on. And it has really been life changing for me. Now we're doing research at UC San Diego on the effects of heart coherence practice on mitochondrial function. I'm
Mm.
so excited about it. It's like, okay, we come full circle, because
Yeah.
I really want, whenever I talk about this, it starts to get into that woo land where people are like, oh, she's talking about energy in the heart. Like, okay, this lady's a little that way, right?
Yeah.
But it's absolutely biological. It changes our biological state. And so I'm really excited to find a mechanism of action, especially in the mitochondria, that we can show doctors and scientists and researchers, hey, this affects the mitochondrial production of ATP. This is something that is good, hard science. And so, yeah, heart coherence was something that really allowed me to shift my own emotional reactions. And then I think also just I should mention self-love, because we're humans, and I'm certainly not a guru who never experiences downs or anger or all those human emotions. And just having space to be human and love myself anyways can be powerful too.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense. Like we have ECGs that measure electrical activity of the heart. We see that it has activity.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm wondering, do you still, are you like in remission, or do you still have flare-ups, or has that kind of gone away?
Yeah, it has gone away for years and years. And it's interesting that you asked that. I did have a flare up last fall. And I think that my presence online has been an interesting journey, because
Mm.
for so long it was just like, here I am, I'm sharing what I love and sharing the science I find exciting. And then as my audience grew, my things were being, my posts, the information I was sharing was being shared to a larger audience. And some of that audience didn't take kindly to this work. And so there was a lot of pushback, and I took it very personally.
Mm.
And it was a big hurdle for these things that we've been talking about, that state of safety and coherence. And I struggled with it. And then I realized, it's like, how many times are we going to learn this lesson? Like, okay, this is why you're having issues. And take a step back and figure out ways to not take this personally, figure out ways to remove yourself. And honestly, I think there was some ego in there too,
Mm.
because the more, it's just such a weird world, social media, right? And this idea
Yeah.
of like followers. And, when someone would say this isn't right, then I would try to like show them, well, here's the research and na na na. And it became this source of friction to my sense of safety. So now it's like, it, disagree, that's okay. I'm just sharing what I think is absolutely incredible. And you don't have to think it is good, and you don't have to like me. And we can both just have wonderful lives. And so that's what,
Right.
It was a short flare, but it was definitely like, okay, let's recreate the wheel and learn that lesson again of how important that emotional, mental safety really is.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Thank you so much for talking to us. I really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like there's a lot that we could talk about.
Oh, yeah. There's
Yeah.
a lot of stuff that we touched on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we will wrap it up here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, and we'll have to do a part 2 sometime because
Yeah.
there's lots to cover, but it's been, wonderful talking with you both today.
Yeah, and where can people find you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Catherine Clinton everywhere. I didn't get creative with that. That's my website, and that's where you can find me on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube. And I just have lots of free information and resources for people. Of course, I teach classes, but I have even more free resources out there, videos and guides and all kinds of information because, like we mentioned, we really just want to get the information out there.
Mhm.
Awesome.
Yeah, and we didn't even talk about fascia.
Yeah, we want to speak about fascia.
Incredible fascia.
Next time.
Mhm. Next time.
Absolutely. Thank you guys.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.